Can everybody hear me, by the way? Or do I need to use the mic?
Use the mic.
Okay, how's that? A lot better? Yeah. All right, got the lights down. So, yeah, I've trained with Bill Mollison, like Ken was saying. I've got my Bachelor of Architecture, which was focusing on permaculture. Currently doing my Masters of Architecture at the University of Tasmania, which is a postgrad degree, and my honours is on permaculture architecture, focusing on how it can fit into the UN Latin America. So without further ado, we'll get into it. That's a permaculture symbol, if you don't recognise it, up in the top left-hand corner. It's a Aboriginal rainbow serpent. It's an infinity symbol, and the rainbow crater of the Aganu people of central Northern Territory. And down in the bottom left-hand corner is actually an Amazon pharmacy. So that's a composting toilet that they use their waste to generate soil fertility, because they can't get fertilisers, obviously. So they use manure basically to fertilise the plants, and they grow all their drugs, all their natural remedies, and they can cure diarrhea, malaria, and all these amazing treatments here. I actually got malaria in the Amazon, had to go to that pharmacy for some treatment, which was great. It saved my life, so pretty grateful for it. This is the lecture outline. It's going to go through permaculture sustainability, what that is, what it's defined as, permaculture architecture, but I've made a permature for that, which is combining two words to come up with a new meaning, which is permatexture. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail. Permaculture urban planning through Latin America and Australia, the different projects I've been involved in. Permaculture in Latin America today, so where it's come from in the last 10 to 20 years since the urban interventions, and permaculture urban interventions, which is a different, more impulsive take on urban planning, holistic design, so feedback loops of energy cycles. So this is a glossary of terms I'll be using in the lecture. So Casa Semilla is a permaculture group I established in northern Mexico. They work with the UN and the University of Monterey with a project I've been doing through the University of Tasmania, which I'll be presenting in this lecture today. Ecocentric, so if you know much about eco-philosophy, it's just kind of how that informs my philosophy and design value system. The definition of permaculture is up there if you wish to have a read of it. And the term favela I'll be using a fair bit because it's a more culturally sensitive term too. It's a Latin translation for slum and regeneration. So in biology, as must be in architecture, architecture must regenerate the land, not just take from it. We've got to give back to it in a positive surplus, not just, my ethos goes beyond sustainability, which is to determine a zero, which is a very hard figure to determine. So if we regenerate energy cycles as a principle, that'll make a much more sustainable outcome in the long run. And sustainability is also looked at in three obvious spheres that overlap: environment, economy and society. So they're the themes that run through this lecture. So I'll get started. So regeneration, this is a term I use a lot in my work. This is a permaculture urban intervention in my home city of Launceston, Tasmania. We got these pallets from the mines that were going to get burnt, put into the atmosphere as carbon waste basically, and we got them donated for free, which was an $8,000 donation by the mines. And we're creating urban gardens for the urban poor of Launceston and using the youth shelters to employ them through it, and we're getting plants donated through different nurseries. So upcycling is a different term to recycling. It's going for longevity, because recycling is breaking a material down to its base components and reassembling it as others, but upcycling is a term I only learned recently that's about using the product in its existing form as a longevity or long life cycle, And that was the whole premise of me getting this project approved, was the upcycling nature of it, because it's a lot more sustainable than recycling. It's a technical term for reusing, basically. So this basically covers what is permaculture in one slide. It's usually a 2-week PDC or permaculture design certificate I teach in Mexico, but here it is in one slide. I think it summarises it nicely. It basically integrates food, shelter, energy, ethics, climate, water and soil into this holistic cycle of design, which is really exciting for me to work in because it follows all my areas of passion and education and experience. And you can pursue a lot within these different realms, but if we look at these different components working together as a holistic cycle or holistic town planning strategy, architecture or gardening, I think we're on a really good and strong and ethical path to sustainability and regeneration, because we need to go beyond sustainability to regeneration to get to the place we need to be with the current climatic and environmental context, particularly that we face in Australia and politically as well. So that's where my thesis lies, but it's also principle and ethical based around ecosystem rehabilitation. And if we can integrate those outcomes into planning and architecture design, or even home building or home ownership or straw bale design, like I've seen the work in the past few days, which is excellent. It's really inspiring. I think we are going towards the right direction. It's just a matter of everybody working together, which is it's a really exciting time at the moment. And then we've got our different ecological productions. So if we can integrate those into architectural outcomes as well, it'll be really positive. So in my design, we'll see later, I've used those to justify the design and inform the geometry of the floor plans, but also to increase building performance passively with tying into the landscape in an endemic fashion, which is pretty cutting edge for old Tassie. So yeah, a bit of a backwater there, but I'm trying to move it a bit forward. It's a really interesting place to work, and obviously pattern geometry, all the patterns in nature we find, we can use those in architecture to inform the different functional relationships, but also our thinking and our how we embody energy cycles in architecture to create more efficient geometries. So that's another quite exciting field I'm involved in at the moment through my degree, and that crosses all the different fields I'm involved in. So this is where I grew up on my grandfather's farm. This is Bill Mollison's farm in the northwest of Tassie. It was an awesome place to learn about permaculture firsthand and permaculture design and building. So we built that barn down in the bottom picture and the one over to the right. But when we arrived there, I think it was 15 years ago, it was just paddocks, and they only produce 3 or 4 cows for market every 2 years. But now we produce 15 or 16 different micro products that we can sell at a quadruple or at an exponential rate compared to what the farm used to grow. But we do, it's an amazing experience growing up there, and I did learn a lot from my grandfather about reading the landscape and the energy cycles of the landscape, which are very important, sun and solar patterns. And this is where I got my understanding for permaculture, and it's what informed my ethics and principle basis as a designer. So there's a lot of different functions going on in these pictures, and there's a lot of, it brings up a lot of emotions and memories for me looking back at these, because yeah, it's where I grew up for 11 years of my education as a designer, but it's also where I have a lot of my memories as a child working too. So if we see along here, these are stone pines which we sell onto the markets, but they also feed the native birds as well. So it's getting this multifunctional ecology, and we can integrate that species into an urban environment, and instead of just having an ornamental tree in an urban environment, we can support native species have a windbreak for people, but also have an income for the urban poor and a food source for the urban poor too, or just for people too. And these that I have enacted in that previous project I was showing you, is shown to generate community. And the reason I got those projects through in the first place was I did them as guerrilla gardening, which is illegal gardening in the CBD of Launceston. And the council went to rip them out, but actually people defended them and said, no, you can't take them out, they're growing food there instead of just pavement, which was quite exciting for me. And then the council said, oh, who's doing this? And I just didn't put my hand up for a while because I didn't want to get in trouble. But they actually got on board positively and supported my project outcomes, which was amazing just for a couple of rebellious 22-year-olds or 25-year-olds acting like teenagers. So yeah, it was quite a good launch for my career, but it was just an impulsive thing, but it's done a lot of good for the city of Launceston. So this is the Permaculture, which is combining two word definition outcomes, and I kind of was brewing on this word or this term for years and years on the farm, and it embodies everything I'm about as a designer, which is creating self-sufficiency feedback loops through urban ecology and energy self-sufficiency. We can easily grow all the food we need in the city of Adelaide or in the city of Launceston. There's enough urban space and there's enough car parks, and there's only one city in the world that does that, and that's Havana, Cuba, that's cut off from the US. So it can be done, and they grow 80% of their food because they've got no other income source, or no external food goes into the city. So what they eat, they have to grow, and if they don't grow, they don't eat. And they grow all their own fuel too. So that's the whole premise of my actions and thesis, is this kind of growing momentum or evolution of my design ethos, which is what keeps me motivated, and what keeps my friends motivated too. I'm passionate about it. So we're off to the Amazon now from little old Tassie. So on the plane we go. So this is food security and sustainability in the Amazon. It's a UN supported project, but the guy that sponsored me to go to the Amazon's Ali Sharif, or Ahmed Ali Sharif, and he's a very big name in permaculture in Latin America and Eastern Africa, and he's helped establish over 80 projects. So he's quite a low flowing character, but he does a lot of amazing work with low income groups, and he's a guy that really inspires me to become a better designer because of how he works politically with groups. Now this site here is in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, but it's 200 hectares surrounded by a slum that's got 600,000 people living in it. Those figures are pretty mind-boggling, just to try and comprehend that alone. But he's rehabilitated this whole site because it was a chemical dump for about 20 years, and they couldn't even grow grass on it in the Amazon rainforest on red soil and with fertiliser. But he's managed to grow this food ecology that's rehabilitated the land and the Amazon rainforest and supports urban food structures. So when I do talk about holistic design, I'm talking about growing food for the urban environments, but also growing community outcome and social outcomes as well. And the architecture is something I'm quite passionate about as well. It's very passive in ventilation. It's 5 degrees cooler inside than it is outside because it's designed for the microclimate, and how the ecology supports that through the vines sweating on the outside. You can feel the cool mist coming in, and it actually makes a real difference, every bit of shade you create around your building, because the equator nearly runs straight through this site, so it's pretty hot and sweaty up there, as you could imagine. So this is a favela that surrounds that Permaculture Education Centre. It's quite a chaotic environment, but it's got a rich sense of community. But when the flood rises, the whole village rises with it because it's on floating pontoons, and the river actually fluctuates by 10 metres, whether it's wet or dry season. So it might look like scrappy and non-innovative design, but it actually has quite a purpose, and there's a lot of function in there and a lot of lot of community and a lot of strength in that alone. Like the sanitation might be down the hill, but there's still a lot of great projects going on there like this one, but they don't get the coverage they necessarily deserve or need for the projects to go ahead. But it is getting a lot better there. We're the project supported by the United Nations as of 2007, so that's quite a big step forward. So this is my Amazon study tour where I went to, as Ken was saying at the start, to learn from the Indigenous Amazonians to set up carbon credits. So this was way back in 2007 when they were only beginning to come onto the table as a way of rehabilitating the Amazon rainforest. So I was more there to learn from my mentors and to teach, which was an amazing experience in itself, and I learned about different yields. But it was quite an interesting adventure because we got lost for a week on the Amazon. Because you can see here, it's 10 kilometres wide, not 10 kilometres long, 10 kilometres wide, and it's 10 channels weaving in and out of each other. So we got lost over in one of those channels over here. So we're going backwards and forwards, side to side, instead of going straight ahead. So that's why we got lost for a week. And the only reason they decided, oh, okay, this is quite serious, is when we ran out of water. They weren't concerned when we ran out of food, because with Indigenous Amazonians that were catching fish and were eating from the rainforest, which was an amazing experience in itself. But they got thrown off because they're not used to travelling at that time of the year because the riverbeds change. But it was a very enriching experience for me, learning from the Indigenous Amazonians, the products they get from the rainforest, but also their cultural beliefs and their environmental outlook. It's quite similar to a lot of Indigenous people around the world. They belong to the land. The land doesn't belong to them, and it doesn't have an economic value. It has a cultural and spiritual value, which is a lot stronger than chopping it down and getting some money once. But yeah, it was a pretty good spot up here on the balcony, sleeping in the hammock there, but I couldn't get a hammock on the way back on the boat because the people higher up in the conference got the cabins lower down, but they had bed bugs, so they kicked me out of my hammock. So I was just sleeping on the deck, but it was still a good time. This is the alternative to permaculture, which is cattle farming. So this is a system that supports European meat production and Argentinian meat production and Brazilian meat production. It's just based on the system of erosion. They come in, they clear the rainforest, they farm it for 3 years, and then the bank or the land erodes into the river. But there's a lot of strength for permaculture in that context, but also in a lot of other contexts. And what I'm trying to communicate is it can be used in any context at all. It's a system of thinking, not a system of design. So instead of just using critical thinking, we're using constructive and generative thinking, critical thinking, and thinking through different systems to create cross-disciplinary action, which is quite a positive strength of permaculture. So going back to the definition of permaculture, this is the different yields we can get out of an ecosystem in the Amazon. They're wide and varied. Instead of just getting beef, we can get beef, fish, and a lot of other products too. But compare this to the one we saw before of the cattle farming. This is this is an Amazon permaculture ecosystem rehabilitated, and we get 15 to 16 different products out of this one forest. And it might seem separate to architecture, but it's intrinsic, because we're people, we live in buildings, but we also need food to eat, and it's where we get that food that makes that sustainable, holistic society that we're all chasing. So this is the outcomes of the project. It was quite an amazing tour in the end. I wasn't expecting that much, but we did I did learn how to establish holistic design feedback loops in terms of society, yields, economy, community, and political support. We managed to establish some new carbon credit ecosystems, which were funded by petroleum companies. It's dirty money, but it's still money to rehabilitate the Amazon. Creating a more diverse local ecosystem and income for the communities, because the problem with the favelas is new residents are coming in all the time. They're not staying on the land. Then people from further down south in Brazil occupy that land and abuse it. And creating a positive and quantitative and numeric value for a connection with nature and a community and educational outcome, which is the strength of permaculture. This is Prince Charles visiting the Amazon a few years after I was there, but I remember walking down that track with the man on the right. He's Bill Mollison's student, and I used to visit Bill quite often before he got very sick, but he's my mentor at the moment, and he's the one who gave me the scholarship to go to the Amazon and go to Brazil to the conference in the first place, which was an amazing experience, which I'm aiming to get again in Cuba later next year. But yeah, I didn't know this about Prince Charles, but he's actually had a permaculture garden for 10 years, and he doesn't publicise those facts. He just gets on and does it, and he doesn't publicise the fact that he's been to the Amazon and supports these amazing projects in the wider media spectrum. He just gets on and does it, which is, I think, a strength to him as well. The information's there if you want to seek it. The details are there if you want to seek it. It's just an amazing recognition of 40 years of hard work through permaculture in Latin America, which is excellent to see. This is Permaculture in Uganda. This is an orphanage project my cousin was working on, but it's also the agricultural policy for Uganda, but we try and Josephine, the student that does it, that I was learning from in the Amazon, she's trying to make it the architectural policy of the country too, because generally I find permaculture is perceived as an agricultural policy, but it's also a holistic architecture one as well, which I'm evolving through my studies. It's pretty inspiring to see the different attitudes and the range and variety of work that keeps everybody motivated, but I think it is a powerful movement that works across climates and across cultures too. This is some of my student work. This is applying permaculture, which is at Permaculture, in Launceston, Tasmania. So this is adaptively reusing a car park in commercial architecture, because we can't just deal with the humanitarian. I personally can't deal with it from an ethical premise. Just for the humanitarian sake, I have to deal with all ends of the scale, so I can feel my work is justified. If I personally feel like I'm leaving the commercial spectrum out, that's not dealing with all ends of the scale, which is quite important for me. But this building represents how I consider commercial architecture as a passively performing system, and it passively ventilates and radiates heat from different angles, but it also improves urban density and creates an urban landscape. But this would never get politically approved in Launceston because of all the conditions that have gone with the sale of the site, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's why I'm moving to the States next year, I think. A bit more visionary over there, but it's still a really interesting project. If you want to have a look at the details or discuss it further with me, it's something I'm also really passionate about. But we have wind turbines on the roof that are spiral shaped, because they're a lot more efficient than the traditional ones. And they're on the roof because wind speeds are a lot higher too on the roof of the building. They go up in an exponential graph. We also have, don't know if you can really pick out that kind of solar shaped dish, but that's a radiant heater for hot water, and this was done before it became a mainstream product. And our teachers are like, what are you drawing on top of your building? But now they know, because it's an available product. But we also, I'm a big fan of urban gardens in the sky, because if we put all our servicing and air conditioning on the product, they're getting the best views of the city, and that's not necessarily doing anything for us. So if we use design more intelligently, such as this project, I think we can create a better city, and it uses retrofitting car parks to create better urban environments as well. So it works across scales. It works on a micro scale for passive performance in a commercially performing density. It also works on a community scale as well by creating a variety of gardens. And actually, it's a funny thing, this is the site where my guerrilla gardening's going in for the Junction Arts Festival, just along this street here in the city of Launceston, which is quite exciting, but it's a small city. It shows you the scale of it. It just happened to happen that way. But these solar reflectors, I'm not sure if you know much about parametrics, but it works on numeric algorithms to get sunlight and ventilation into buildings. So you can just plug this algorithm into the computer program and it works out the heat and ventilation distribution for your commercial architecture building, because it's too difficult to do it with a variety of geometries and microclimates. But it's really, really interesting to still be involved in this level of projects too. I'm working on a few private consultancies in Launceston with this scale of project, which is a bit politically contentious at the moment. So I can't comment on it too further, but it's a pretty exciting time as well. Things are happening there finally. Yeah, and just creating double height spaces, not only to create volume, but to create the indoor courtyard and ventilation and access to natural light. Yeah, so we can't just go for floor space ratio inside a building, we've got to go for quality of space as well, so the inhabitants are happy too, which is something architects are cottoning on to, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. This is my permaculture model for the slum in India. It's in Dharavi. It might come across as a little bit ignorant or arrogant, but I did my best to work with the resources that occur on site. So the structural cores are filled up with pottery because there's a large pottery culture in the slum. I also introduced bamboo. This is an unbuilt student project, by the way. I don't mean to get anyone too excited. But bamboo has a stronger tensile strength than steel, and a stronger one in compression as well, per weight or per kilo. So we use that in a variety of joins that can grow the structure up literally, and that the green bushes in the street is a bamboo growing. So they can grow their building materials for free, and they can use existing clay resources to build and fire mud bricks, which is an important resource to have, and it's a little bit prone to earthquakes, but the idea is based on Architecture for Humanity's concept of mud brick stabilised with bamboo structure. But as part of the concept, I also implemented bamboo to create paper for a newspaper, and there's a strong recycling ethic there too as well, which is there was a great deal of information I learnt from that particular project. This is looking at the permaculture urban plan, focusing on the streetscape, because it's so dense it's hard to get light down. But if we move around some of the buildings with consideration, we can fit in higher density, or not higher density, but better density disparity and microclimates within the slum. But it's the highest people per hectare, which is I think 750 to 1100, which I don't know if you know much about housing density, but that's a lot. I think suburbia achieves 110 per hectare, so that just gives you a comparison. And the city of say Melbourne might be 300 people per hectare, but the higher you go up, the higher density you get. So it's quite there can be up to 25 people sleeping in one room, and the conditions are quite bad. So we also worked at it from a servicing point of view. And the lecturer that I had, Richard Burnham, that was running it, does these projects with the slums through the UN as well. So it's quite important to work within those criteria within these projects as well, But permaculture is an additional layer on that provides a different level of meaning and function, and yeah, microclimates as well. Endemic sustainability is a really motivating term for me. It's sustainability that responds uniquely to the climate, culture and ecology of the site to inform architectural outcomes, but to inform how people relate to buildings as well. It's a pretty important term to describe how I work across the world, but also across different projects in Australia and Latin America as well, because it informs how sustainability represents climate, culture and ecologies to form holistic outcomes. So talking about energy, so using natural resources that are found on site, whether it's clay in Darravie, solar and wind power in Launceston, or methane capture in the Amazon, or a pharmacy, they're all using the same method of generative thinking or constructive thinking, and it's all coming from the same basis, which is permaculture up here. So it all trickles down to form a holistic feedback loop, which is an important concept to get in order to respond to site, and you can use it in any project, and I've used it from housing design in Launceston to teaching gardens to Indigenous minds in the Caribbean of Mexico. So the same method of thinking that's generated all these outcomes can be applied to any context if you use the basic principles of permaculture and apply them through geometry and function. I know it sounds like a complex argument, but it's the way I think about it and the way I design. But if you have any questions, please do not be afraid to approach me or ask at the end. So this is my Junction Arts Festival project. This is my legal little garden. I was quite excited about it. Just popped it out there with a few mates in the middle of the night and expecting it to be trashed by the council, by AFL footy fans, but we grow a lot of food there. We feed the university, which is 450 students, because students were complaining about the price of veggies, so we were like, okay, we won't complain about it, we'll do something about it. So we managed to build this pretty big garden for $120. We got some free tyres from the tip, got some free soil donated, got some really cheap plants that the nursery was throwing out, and put it all together and spelled an algorithm with the tyres. So it was binary for SAD, so SAD, which is School of Architecture and Design. So it was kind of a bit cryptic there, but we're expecting to get told to pull it out, but the whole staff rushed out and like, what are you doing? Get rid of it. And it's like, no, you can get rid of it if you like. And then from that state, they actually came around to the idea, warmed to it and saw the positive outcomes for it. So instead of just growing food, we're growing a sense of community, which may sound tokenistic or blasé, but it's actually quite true, because instead of it just being a lawn, we're growing food that does break down the barriers between staff and students, but also between students and other schools in the precinct. So it's they were very unexpected and unperceived outcomes, and it's still there 7 or 8 months later and hasn't been vandalised once, and 11,000 AFL fans trek through it twice a month. But it was pretty funny, because I was harvesting a cabbage for dinner from there, and a policeman came over and said, hey, what are you doing? Don't steal that. And I'm like, oh, I planted it, it was urban intervention. And he kind of got all fuzzled and flustered and had to walk away, quite embarrassed. And I'm quite proud of that, embarrassing a police officer. Yeah, so it was quite good from that point of view as well. But it also inspired my next big urban intervention, which was with the Junction Arts Festival, which is the one over on the left, which is using an old fire escape as a vine garden as well. So we're growing food all over the city in different car parks and just niche gardens as well, with the same project and ethos. This is the big project that I've been spending the last couple of months of my life on. I've had to put a fair bit of volunteer time into it as well, but instead of just using cars as storage devices to take people to the city, then that space is not used during the day. We're growing food in these different car parks around here, in those pallet gardens I showed you at the start of the presentation. They go on a truck in the middle of the night and pop up in the morning, and we're growing food in the city for the city. So going with that Cuban communist, not a communist by the way, going with that Cubanist ecological footprint, so aiming for that ecological footprint. I think we have to aim a lot higher than what we are. We can't be satisfied with what we've got. We've got to keep pushing the boundaries. It's good to be sustainable, but what does that actually mean for you as an individual, or for me as a designer, or for you as a designer or student or teacher? So I think it's really important for me personally, for my professional development, for me to keep questioning myself and my projects, and keep learning from people like Brett, Jeremy, and all the Adelaide Sustainable Building crew to push my design forward. But that also feeds back into my work to get better development. And because I'm so open-minded about my ideas, I take on criticism, but I say, okay, what can I do with that criticism? I can make my projects better. So instead of taking it personally and letting it get me down, I actually capture that energy force and spew it back into my work and make it 10 times as big. So it's quite it's a really good attitude I've adopted in the last few years. But I was going to do this one illegally, but I had to go legit with it apparently to get it in my portfolio. So I wanted to do it illegally, but it's probably a wise move, seeing I'm becoming a professional, to grow up and get it through council. But yeah, it's been an inspiring process. This is how we build them, which is quite exciting too. This is where they're going in the car park, and that's the design that got approved. This is a crazy greenhouse we built for $300. It's 300 square metres, but it's pallets stacked up on top of each other with tyres on the top so the plastic doesn't rip, draped over the top. This is my permaculture project in Latin America for the UN Development Council. I'm very excited about this project too. This is me with a mullet in Mexico, my holiday haircut. And then doing humanitarian consultancy in the Caribbean, which was really inspiring to learn from Indigenous minds, but it was also really motivating for me to come back to uni and finish off my degree as well. Bit of Mayan architecture in Oaxaca. It's not actually the Mayan people, it's the Oaxacan people, but they use endemic terracing to relate directly to the site to produce a holistic outcome. So trying to get architecture and the UN Development Council back to that ecological footprint that's endemic to site, that uses endemic architecture. So just wrapping up now, we'll have a speed date and go through the last few slides a bit quickly. I just got a bit passionate and put a bit too much work in here, but this is the holistic outcome I had for my project, which got positive feedback from the United Nations and the local government in Monterey, which went further than I was expecting, but it was quite inspiring to get that kind of feedback and that kind of enthusiasm about my project, because I was expecting it to go nowhere, but it went everywhere instead, including Adelaide. So this is just the favela permatexture that we've developed there, local ecologies through that Casa Similia group, growing endemic medicines, and doing all the masks, so looking after sanitation before we look after urban density. So getting that priority list down there within the permaculture ethos. Just more pretty drawings, the pretty site, but it's not trying to polish it up, it's just trying to communicate the feeling of site, but also the design ethos behind the project. And there's some more pictures of Teddy Cruz, who's a humanitarian architect in the north of Mexico. So he's a benchmark for the project. And we've got Earthships up in the left-hand corner, but that all informs a holistic outcome for the United Nations that I present in my thesis, which I invite you to have a look at. So I think without further ado, I think that's it, guys, and thank you for being so attentive and patient, and it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.